I hope that your bracket isn't busted. I know mine unfortunately was. I had Auburn, which, whatever. I didn't really watch as much college basketball this year as I had hoped, but regardless of that situation, like I said last week, USC unfortunately didn't make the tournament. Bronny not playing in the March Madness this season at least. So that being said, also there really wasn't a ton that happened over this past weekend. Like there was a crazy Shaq jersey. I think it was his debut jersey that sold for around $200K, I believe was the price. Pretty wild piece of history though, to just be selling, kind of in. Or actually, not debut Lakers jersey, not rookie debut, because rookie debut would have been with the Magic. But a card that I talked about a little bit on Hobby Hotline with Horatio and Rich Klein this past weekend was the 1-of-1 Bronny LeBron card. I talked about this. I talked about the card probably, I think it was like Tuesday, maybe of last week when I saw that it was coming to an end. It did end up coming to an end, the sale. It ended up being $114,000. And I've talked about this card a couple times. I know that because sometimes it just, whatever the biggest story that I can find is, or at least I think is the biggest story with maybe the most interest, is what I'm just gonna talk about that. And I think like the card being announced, the card being pulled, it being graded, it being sold, or being listed, and then it being sold. So I probably have done a couple episodes on this card. So with it selling at that $114,000, I wasn't sure where it was going to land. I think maybe that was one thing that I feel like I talked about on a previous episode and then on the Hobby Hotline was I knew it was going to be over $100K, but between $100K and $1 million, because a lot of people were saying it was worth $1 million. And this is another scenario where, I feel like I saw a couple people saying that it was going to be worth $1 million. I don't know necessarily why or how it could get to that point, but it was only a couple people. So I mean, that's another thing where I bet you're going to see the boo sports card people, on Twitter and Instagram this week talking about, oh, look at all these people that were saying it was going to be worth $1 million, and then it's only worth, $100. It's still worth $100,000, $114,000, and it was pulled and graded by somebody just at an LCS. So like, this should be a card. A lot of these sales, it feels like maybe it could be that 2020 and that whole era like made us maybe jaded towards like card sales that are supposed to be historic. Because this is like, it's the first Rich Klein, I was talking to him, and he said that this is the first Topps LeBron auto, which I didn't know that at all. And it's the first, obviously, it's the first non-upper deck auto since like early in LeBron's career. So this is a historic card, and it's still sold for $114,000, which is still a phenomenal price for this card. Sure, maybe, I don't know, maybe people were saying that it should have been in the millions. I think too, one thing that is something to take into consideration and take with a grain of salt is that people making predictions online, they're just doing it for content. So I think, I try to myself at least say the things that I just believe and that I'm not necessarily trying to say something because I think it's going to get a lot of clicks or, tweet something because I think, oh, people are going to like this. I'm just going to say the stuff that I want to say, basically. And so what that happens sometimes is you can see some people make predictions on cards like this because they know that, whether people agree with them or they disagree with them, that it probably is going to get clicks. Like saying that this card was going to be worth $1 million to, I would say a majority of people within sports cards is kind of crazy. I would say like, it's kind of like, that's sort of a pretty wild prediction when we've really seen a huge, humongous slowdown of cards selling over $1 million and even selling in that $1 million range, to be honest. Like not even just cards selling for over $1 million, but cards even, anywhere close in that $800,000 to $900,000 range. We're really seeing that like these cards themselves, they have to be historic, but also have I don't know, the longevity value. I don't know if that's exactly what I'm trying to say, but like they have to have the longevity of the card being a card for a while. I think maybe that's sort of what I'm trying to say here. This Bronny card, maybe down the road, if Bronny goes on to be sort of, I mean, I don't even know really what has to happen for this card to be a good buy. At 114,000, I would say if you're, and again, this is something I've talked about on shows before, if you're in the market for a card for $114,000, you are definitely not, it's definitely not your last $114,000. So like, if you have the money to buy a card like this, and I don't know if they're investing or if they are buying it just because they're a LeBron super collector, like if you're a LeBron super collector, this is an iconic piece of his sports card history. Like I said, first Topps auto, first auto, just non-upper deck in forever. So this is a historic card. I don't even care, honestly, what the price was. 114, I actually do think that's a little low. Like, I think closer to $250,000 probably. Like, if Bronny, you know, I mean, I guess in theory, if Bronny had played in the NCAA tournament, that means that USC would have played a little bit better during the regular season, which there's a chance that means he would have been part of them playing better potentially. So there's a bunch of different factors here of if USC were to make it to the tournament, that would mean I would think that would mean a totally different type of scenario for Bronny. I think that's how I would put it. Like the thought that he would be playing much better here, that would make the team go to the tournament, and then once the team goes to the tournament, from there, if Bronny does anything really, like he could shoot. If he scores 20 points, I bet you that helps this card pretty significantly. But I just think, like I said, it's a historic card in the grand scheme of things, and just because it didn't sell for $1 million doesn't mean that's not historic, doesn't mean that it's a bad card. And I don't know. These are straw man arguments that we sometimes have within content creation and sports cards, is like we make up arguments that don't really exist to try and prove our point. Like, of if we have a point and somebody else has an opposite point, no, that's not what it is. If we have a point that we want to talk about or argue or whatever, there are times where I've seen, people just make stuff up on Twitter, and, not necessarily anybody in particular or anybody that I can even bring up right now, but it's like the straw man argument concept, I think, is one that's ingrained in sports cards. I think is one way to put it. Just it's not even just sports cards. I think it's the discourse online in general, is instead of reinforcing someone's argument, they're more likely to, and this actually could be what I'm saying. I'm doing what I'm saying that people do right now by not having any specific examples. But rather than coming up with a good argument, somebody would rather say that someone has the opposite argument and then try and just say the things for them. Like I said, that I just basically did the thing that I've said that people do. Like I made up a scenario where, someone's getting into an argument with somebody. But either way, if you see people saying that this isn't historic because of the price or for whatever reason, that's just not true. It is a historic card. So we're going to see, I don't know, Bronny still hasn't announced whether he's going to the league or if he's going to stay. I would imagine he's probably going to stay in college. Like I said, for him, dad's a billionaire. You don't really have to go to the league to make the money. And especially now with NIL, you could play college as long as you want, get the NIL money, be able to play. I mean, college is probably going to be fun at some point for Bronny if he gets good enough. So I would say that's probably what Bronny will do. And so, again, this card, I don't know if the person bought it for an investment purpose or if they're just a LeBron super collector, but it sold for $114,000 over last week, I think towards the end of the week. I just didn't cover it. I talked about it on Hobby Hotline, but the card has now been sold, and it's going to go to an owner for $114,000. There's still, I think, another couple weeks of spring training left, if I'm not mistaken. I forget if MLB teams start their season, if they start their season like in April, like the beginning of April, or if like there's a March. Actually, this probably makes sense just to quickly Google really quickly just to see like when opening day is. That would probably, I guess technically it is opening day because like the Dodgers are playing overseas and their games are legit. I'm thinking this actually opening day might be this week now that I'm looking at it. Opening day MLB, I guess opening day Red Sox. We'll just look it up. I don't know if they have the actual. See, it would be. Yeah, so it looks like maybe Thursday or maybe tomorrow. I'm confused. I'm confused a little bit here. If I'm going to be no March 28th. That's what it looks like. It's saying that's opening day for the Red Sox at least. So with that being said, what we are seeing right now is we're seeing a lot of the names within the MLB top 100 prospects getting basically their assignments for the year. Big name, number one prospect, Jackson Holliday, who was in the MLB last year, going to be starting in AAA. I guess that, that's good. 20-year-old, get him some more reps, get him some more playing time with players who, I don't know, get him hot before the season really gets going. We have, it looks like 5 or 3 of the top 5 are either in the MLB or have been in the MLB. Jackson Churio, MLB for the Milwaukee Brewers, and then Evan Carter, who was one of the main, I don't know, I would say main stars that were being promoted within this year's Top Series 1. And then looking throughout the rest of the top 10, it's kind of a mismatch of AA, AAA. Wyatt Langford, another Texas Rangers prospect, number 6 behind Evan Carter, which is kind of interesting. So they got two prospects in that top 10, which I guess, that's pretty good. Marcelo Meyer, he was a Red Sox prospect, was in the top 10. I think he dropped down into 15. Whatever, I guess. But I think what this says is that, like, when you're prospecting, there are certain time periods when you have to choose to sell the cards. And I almost think within baseball, selling the cards when their announcement they're getting up to the majors is really going to be, in my opinion, probably one of the best times to sell prospects cards. Because, like, once you get past that, it just feels like it, with prices of cards, it just feels like there's such a wide range. I mean, you look at players like Mookie Betts, you look at players like Mike Trout. Mike Trout's kind of still pretty pricey. But like even a couple of years ago when Mookie Betts was like, he had won MVP, he was a multiple-time All-Star, multiple-time World Series champion, his card prices were still pretty reasonable. Ohtani, out of the conversation, there's still more stuff developing, and he had a press conference the other day saying, everything is a lie or all this stuff. I don't know exactly what happened. I don't really know. If I had to guess with Ohtani, I think probably what happened was his interpreter was using... Ohtani knew that the interpreter was betting on games. Maybe, I don't know, maybe they had a rule, don't bet on my games or something along those lines, but he knew the interpreter was betting because it's not... I don't think it's illegal it's not against the rules for interpreters to bet. Obviously, players, which now there's a whole thing with, there was a player on the Toronto Raptors, which again I've seen the argument that it's like, oh well, all of these things, all of these companies are sports betting, they're sponsored by sports betting. It's like, yeah, but it's not hypocritical to be like, tell the players, hey, you can't bet on sports, like. I'm sorry, it's like you're a millionaire. Go buy scratch tickets. Go do Keno. Go to this casino. Do anything other than bet on sports because it's just like the integrity of the game really starts to crumble pretty quickly when you have players betting on the sport that they're playing. I think that you shouldn't be doing that at all, even if it's not your team. I don't think it's a good idea, and I don't think you should be doing it. But back to the point that I'm talking about here. So with Ohtani, you're seeing, and just players in general within the MLB, you're seeing the prices really vary when you have players who are like superstars in the MLB. And then especially because you also have but you have the difference between pitchers and hitters. Obviously, pitchers are very much like NFL position players where they just don't get the same amount of love that a lot of that the quarterbacks or position players do. I don't really necessarily think there's a position within the MLB that is overwhelmingly more valuable, the same way that like quarterback is for football versus the rest of the position players. But MLB, I think, probably one of the best times to be selling your cards if you're trying to profit. And this also kind of determines on when you bought the card, how well known was the prospect. I mean, my philosophy when prospecting is anybody that's in, I don't know, you could use the top 100 probably, and I think there are enough players within the top 100 that you could look on this list, and if you want to choose from this list, you could probably find players who are cheap enough with high enough upside that you wouldn't have to go off that top 100 list. But if you really want to go off the beaten path, go with some of these players that are not in the top 100 and, you know, spend, I don't know how much you'd be spending on prospect cards. I think at this point, any good prospect that either is on the top 100 or isn't, most people, there's probably a group of people buying their cards already. So you could use the top 100 as sort of a guide, but then if you want to go off that top 100, that's where you're going to find the really probably cheaper players, the players who are going to be a lot less expensive just based on the fact that if they're not in the top 100, people probably don't know about them. Maybe people within organizations know, but people, you know, people in casual, I mean, honestly, casual baseball fans probably don't even know who Jackson Holliday is, realistically. Like, they probably know the rookies as they come up and they start playing well, but, like, this top 100 prospect list is probably, it's interesting because it's one of the only times within sports where it's like, you have a list of players, and it's, you know, you don't really have this list in other sports, I don't think, but, like, you have the list of players, and you could have the number one player, Jackson Holliday, and people may not even know who that is. Like, Wander Franco was a number one prospect for 3 years, and I don't think we're also ever going to see that either. That was really rare that a prospect that young jumps that high in the rankings. You know, unfortunately, what happened with him, but I don't think we'll ever see a number one prospect be there for 3 years. And especially the weird thing with him was that, like, he was the number one prospect, and still, I think people probably didn't know who he was. The casual baseball fan probably didn't know who Wander Franco is. They definitely don't know who, you know, some of these players are on this list. Like, Jackson Holliday, again, he played in the majors, so maybe people do. Evan Carter played in the majors. You know, Junior Caminarino, I think he also played in the majors, if I'm not mistaken. But like I said, these players, people may not know who they are. And I just think it's interesting that there's this top 100 list, and prospecting within baseball is one of the more popular niches within sports cards in general. And then there's this top 100 list, and everybody kind of tries to pick and choose where they think players are going to go up, they're going to go down, all of these things. But I really do think that, like, there are a couple moments for players when they get their cards, when you should be selling them. And I think that the announcement of when they're going to be making their Major League debut is probably, I don't know, just based on my anecdotal thoughts on this, not even really based on any data necessarily, but I'm just looking at the pricing of players throughout the league and then the pricing of prospects, and it just doesn't add up. That's kind of the other weird thing about baseball prospecting, is it's like the money feels like it's allocated in weird ways within baseball, because, you know, the players who are in the league feel like they should be the ones that are really getting most of the money. But also baseball is just such an interesting sport where it's like there's so many analytics and the season is so long, and it's like there's all of these things that really take away from someone being a super hardcore fan of the sport. Because it's just like, how are you going to watch all of these games? It's crazy. And then you have all the pro teams, and then you have all the minor league teams, and there's like 4 or 5 different minor league teams for each pro team. So you have another, 40 players on each of those rosters, and there's just so many players. It's really pretty insane how many players there are realistically playing pro baseball. So you have that top 100 list, and then you have players not on the top 100 list. You know, you even could say, well, if you could say if you're getting a player lower on the list as they make their way up, each time the new roster, each time the new list is announced, maybe that's a way. Maybe that's a time where you could sell some cards for some profit depending on when you bought them. For me, I do like finding diamonds in the rough. Like maybe the top 100 list, with there being 100 players, you probably can find some good players on there that have some decent prices, and then sell them eventually when they get called up or they move up and down. They move up the list, hopefully not down the list, but when they move up the list, you can sell them there. And I don't know if there's necessarily, and maybe that's one of the other things, is there's no tried and true strategy within baseball. I feel like with each player, it really comes down to knowing that player's market. And if you're, investing, that's what you have to do. I mean, and I think the investing era of sports cards it's not as good. It's not as a strong concept as maybe it once was. And I think that's maybe that's a conversation probably for another day, because that's just, I think it's just a conversation for another day. So I think that's what we'll wrap basically the episode up here with just, this top 100 list. You can really use, like I said, I don't think it exists really in other sports. Like you don't have multiple minor league teams within each sport. Like within the NBA, you have the G League. Within the NFL, you don't really have anything. NHL, there's one minor league. There's also juniors within Canada, which is where a lot of players will end up going before they go to the NHL. I mean, you could also look at college, but baseball is just one of the only sports that really has so many players in it that like you can work your way around this list, or you can make your own list and you can look at your own stats and stuff like that. And I think that's one reason why people do like prospecting within baseball, if I'm going to be honest. I think we are potentially, or not we, excuse me, I think Topps missed out on an opportunity this year to really take, I think, women's basketball, like women's college basketball, to like another level. Because I think this year we have still in the NCAA tournament, which I think is, lucky when you have something like this. I think we had really, like, I'm just looking at the bracket, like maybe one or two of the top seeds, but like the most interesting seeds are all still going to the Sweet 16 and will still be playing. So the 29th and 30th, so that would be Friday and Saturday. I mean, UConn, Stanford, Virginia Tech, which Virginia Tech unfortunately had the defensive player of the year who got injured like towards the end of the year. I don't think she's coming back from what I've heard. I'm not 100% sure. Actually, we did miss out on one interesting matchup. It would have been LSU versus Louisville, because if you followed any of LSU this year, they have a player named Haley Van Leith who played for Louisville, and there was a bit of, I guess there was some arguing that was going on that team before she decided to transfer. I mean, she was one of the other interesting players in last year's tournament because she was unfortunately, she was the player that received the "You Can't See Me" from Caitlin Clark, which, again, Caitlin Clark, just insane, like 30 points in the tournament. I think we're seeing a bit of a, I don't know, if you listen to the show, you've heard my advocacy for this sport. South Carolina, obviously, they're another team that, made it through the Sweet 16. Still some great matchups. I mean, Notre Dame is always an interesting team to watch in college. Then like I said, UConn, Stanford, Gonzaga, Texas, Duke, they're all still in it. USC too. I mean, I think they were the number 1 overall seed, which they actually had, I think, one of the more interesting ad campaigns. I'm not 100% sure what the ad was for. I know it was the ad was for Player Tribune, but I don't know I'm not sure if the ad was just to promote the NCAA tournament for just overall, because they had a tournament where it was like the concept of the commercial was like, don't pick us, and then they named off all of these things that were like, they're the number 1 team in the nation, like their first time they've done this, all of these crazy things. And I thought, I mean, it was brilliant storytelling, in my opinion, from whoever put this together at Player Tribune for USC, because again, they had, I mean, it's just, the women's tournament has been much more chalk, I think, than the men's tournament, which, again, the men's tournament this year, my team went in the first round. I didn't really watch as much men's college basketball this year. I know a few of the players, like Hunter Dickinson. I know Edie for Purdue. But like I said, I really think that this year Topps, I think that they dropped the ball when it comes to when it came to just women's products. I don't know if we're ever going to see another year as entertaining or as important within women's college basketball as this year, if I'm going to be honest. And again, I know that products take a little bit of time to they do take a little bit of time to create, so you're going to find that, like, you know, they maybe weren't able to get a product in the buzzer. And I do think that, you know, coming into this season, there was like 3 players that I really knew. Like, you know, I knew obviously Caitlin Clark. I knew Paige Beckers, which I think I've been pronouncing her name Buchers. I don't know if I've heard people pronounce it both ways. I'm just going to start pronouncing it Beckers. And if I hear it pronounced a different way, I might start pronouncing it another way. But either way, and then Juju Watkins is another big name at USC. And Angel Reese, and then Haley Van Leith, and then she went to LSU. So 4 names I kind of knew coming into the season. But this is somebody who, you know, I had followed Paige Beckers for a couple years, like as she was playing at UConn. Obviously gets hurt last year, which is devastating. I think next year she's really going to be the star of this of the landscape of women's college basketball. I think I don't know if I was one of the first people kind of talking about this, but like I do remember Paige Beckers talking about her a few years ago. Maybe not on this show necessarily, but it was definitely on, because I knew about her going into last season, so that would have been probably a few years ago. And I think I jumped off the bandwagon a little bit too quick. I mean, I think that she is honestly missing that year is definitely big, but now that she said that she's coming back for another year, I guess that will mean that Topps will have another opportunity. She was in this year's Bowman Chrome. So if you're looking for cards of hers, she has her first Bowman in this year's Bowman Chrome, which I think if Topps, I get that she didn't play last year, but if Topps had really, I don't know if it wasn't that they didn't know or maybe it was just because she wasn't playing, but if she had been in last year's Bowman Chrome basketball, I mean, with her and Caitlin Clark, it would have just been really an insane kind of product, I think, last year. And I think, like I said, with coming out with like the dual product, I don't necessarily know if they would have been able to come out with multiple women's products to see how they would have done. But I do think that this year, unfortunately, would have been the year for them to test that out, because of how just like exciting the year was for a lot of the top games, a lot of the top college games, regular season, were all like women, played by women. Like, obviously the Caitlin Clark, record breaker. And then if you watch the Big Ten tournament, she had like a crazy performance in the Big Ten championship against Nebraska. That was like, it was back and forth, and she was just coming up and down the court and having to play defense, and then going and shooting. It was a really phenomenal game, if I'm going to be honest. And I think that hopefully next year, Topps is planning. I mean, I think at this point, anybody who would be going to the draft will have announced that they were going to the draft. So I don't know next year what they're going to do with college. I think that just in general, they should be trying to double down a little bit and add more college products. I know that they probably have to be Bowman products. Realistically, they probably can't come out with like a flagship set for college basketball, because technically the flagship set is the Bowman set. But I do think that Bowman set, realistically, I guess it should be 50-50, but I think between the checklist, I do think that they either need to expand it to include more players, because also that's one of the other things within college basketball is, I think, or no, maybe they need to come out with 2 sets. Like, they need to come out with maybe they need to do it like how they do it in baseball, where they have sets throughout the whole entire year. Like, they come out with a set at maybe, I don't know, going into the beginning of the year, and then midway through the year they need to, or maybe it's the NCAA tournament potentially. That's where they come out with that second set, where that's going to be, like Bowman update for players that kind of were important this season or something along those lines. I just think that they need to expand the women's cards, and with Caitlin Clark, they're going to be losing a big asset there. And I do think that they have come out with a ton of Tops Now cards, which I think is very smart. I think it's smart with the market that they have, because it's not as large of a market as some other sports. So it's like they could come out with Caitlin Clark cards every single day, and it wouldn't even come close to the amount of cards that you're going to see of any of these other sports. So I think the oversaturation of cards isn't even really in the realm of possibility. So I think that they just need to put their foot on the gas here and really just come out with more women's cards, just in general. I think if they want to do women's, basketball, that's probably a good place to start. I think an awesome, if you have been following the UNC women's field hockey, this is kind of random. Not really random, because it was like the big story in women's sports this year. So the coach she graduated last year, and I don't remember. I don't think there was a card for her. I don't know if Tops or anybody did any like big sets, which I think they realistically should have probably done some sort of big set for this occasion, honestly, because it was like she was a senior and graduated last year. And last year, she asked the athletic director, she wanted to be the coach, and the coach the athletic director was like, you have to go win the national championship. And then she did, and then she got the job. And then in her first year as the coach, she won the national championship again. Which, to have all that star power, I'm sure that definitely helps at UNC. But either way, it's like, these are moments, I think, within women's sports that need to be, we have so many of these moments within men's sports that get sort of immortalized within cards. I think that something like this, I think that there is an opportunity here for Tops to look at this sport and really start creating more cards around the women's game, because, what that's going to do is it's going to generate buzz around younger players within college, and that's all that's going to do is just help the league, help women's college basketball, all these things, because you're going to have people that are going to get into cards that may not really know much about Paige Beckers or Caitlin Clark. It's probably impossible not to know anything about Caitlin Clark, but like players who maybe they don't know that are going to go on to be, and because that's the other thing, I think we're going to see a renaissance of the WNBA as well, because all of these players are going to go play in the league, which, again, because I've talked about with Caitlin Clark, she has so many opportunities with NIL that she doesn't really have to go. She could have stayed another season because of COVID, which is crazy, and she could have probably made more money, honestly, she probably could have made more money playing in college than she would have in the WNBA because of the contract structure for rookies. And with the NIL, it's like insane the money that they can make. So she's like a State Farm athlete. So I mean, she is like the top of the top in terms of NIL. So maybe that's what she's looking at. She's saying, well, I could stay in college, or I could go and challenge myself and go play in the WNBA. I mean, hopefully that she goes on and plays as well as she did in college. That would be extremely exciting. But overall, I just think that Tops and Fanatics, if they can do one more product, like this is, I'm hoping that maybe it's towards the end of this, because if it hasn't been announced yet, I don't know if they would be able to, but I'm hoping that maybe there's one more product on the horizon that's going to have some Caitlin Clarks in it before she gets drafted, because once she gets drafted, I'm pretty sure that's where her license for her goes to Panini, because she also signed the exclusive with Panini. But because she's going to go to the WNBA, Panini still has that WNBA license. So, I think that's going to be a big product next year. I guess we'll see which other players end up going to the draft as well. But I think next year is going to be very interesting to see how Tops and Fanatics and maybe Panini come into this and say, here's what we're going to do with women's college cards. It is finally here after the long-awaited winter. It's baseball's opening day. It's definitely it's one of the best days on the calendar, I think. Maybe the first day of the NCAA tournament is one of my favorite sports days on the calendar. I think that opening day in baseball, when you can just watch the games all day long. It's just, it's really hard to beat, honestly, if you're comparing any other sporting events. And yesterday, that with opening day, and I don't know if they timed it like this. I think they maybe should have even waited a day, if I'm going to be completely honest, because they came out with Topps Big League yesterday on the 27th, and the product is actually one that I actually do like a lot, because I think within the product it is cheap, and you're getting okay quality cards. But you can get like a ton of them, and they're super accessible. I mean, if you want to buy hobby boxes, they're super easy to find on eBay, or, even if you were buying them in the store, I'm sure, and it's kind of crazy to look back at some of the prices, but like you're probably finding like $15 to $20 blasters realistically at, like a store like Walmart or Target or whatever. And like I said, it's a fun product, and they're doing this for two things they did in last year that I liked last year that they did again this year was the influencer checklist, and then they did the follow back checklist, which I thought both of those were really cool ideas to add to this product. And the influencer checklist I think is pretty good. The people on there, I mean, I've heard of most of the people on there. Like it was the same the year before, and I mean I think it's a cool idea. And I mean, as somebody who makes content, it's something that we should all, I don't know, maybe not we should all, but it's something I think would be cool to have, be honest, be on a Topps card within a product, like pull a pack with the card. I don't know. I mean, it's hard to really, if you don't want to do it, I think you're just honestly, I don't know, a hater. Like, really? Like, you're really going to not accept to be in a Topps card if you don't want to do it? Well, like, whatever. These are some people on Twitter that complain about everything, and they're, well, the influencer checklist, and people are like, oh, I don't want to be called an influencer. It's like, yeah, and we're all influencers in our own way, if you really think about it. Like, and it is strange that the term influencer has really, that it's become so negative within the hobby, I think. And I don't know if it's because, I mean, I don't think it's because anybody really came in and said that they were an influencer and then they, came in and left. I think maybe it's just that there were influencer people that did come in and did leave. And I don't know. I mean, like I said, you can come in and leave and come back and leave and come back and leave within sports cards. Like, I've done it a couple times where I made content pretty consistently, and then things like slow down, stuff happens in your life or whatever. But like, I don't know. I think it's a little overblown, if I'm going to be honest, with some of just, I don't know, the dialogue around the term online. I don't know, whatever you want to look at it. I don't really care. Like, if someone were to say you were an influencer, I guess, I don't know, whatever. But they have the checklist. I thought it was cool. I thought they, Dr. Collectibles, I think, is really great. But there were a lot of breakers, which I thought was kind of interesting. And like last year, the year before, like Slabstocks does breaks, Ryan Card Collector 2 does breaks, I guess Mama Breaks does breaks, obviously. But like, I felt like there were more personalities maybe than they were breakers, where, I guess Mama Breaks is in the name, so there's kind of that. But looking at the checklist, like three of the 5 people that were on this checklist, they were just breakers, I think. Or since Windy City Pulls, I think, was on that list too. So I'm assuming they do breaking as well. But I don't know. And we obviously have seen such a distinct shift with Fanatics and breaking. Obviously they launched Fanatics Live, which is like, that's their attempt at trying to, I think Fanatics Live is obviously Fanatics' attempt to kind of distribute their product in a market that exists within sports cards, not create a product and then try and bring it into cards, if that makes sense. Like, I feel like one reason why I think maybe fractional investing, it had a hot period because a lot of people were talking about it, if I'm going to be honest. Like, I mean, I did work with Collectible on their TikTok and stuff. I made all of their videos. And I still think it's an interesting idea, but I think what happened was you were taking something that wasn't necessarily a part of sports cards and trying to make it a part of sports cards, and they didn't mesh, or they did at first, but then things kind of didn't work as well as people expected them to, where breaking, Fanatics isn't reinventing the wheel. Like, the fractional investing in cards, I think, was fairly revolutionary for this industry. I think breaking is still in the early stages, if I'm going to be completely honest. Like, sure, people have been doing this for 10 years, 15 years, but, like, I still think we're in the beginning stages of where breaking can really go. And I don't necessarily know where, I don't know where the expansion is going to happen within breaking, but I just think that there's going to be more safety nets put in. It's still, I mean, we're even within sports cards, I think sports cards is still in the early stages of online selling. Like, eBay has only been around for 20 years, so it's like 25 years. So it's like, that's a lot of people's primary ways of selling cards if they're buying them. So we're still such in the early stages of sports cards online that there are going to be there are going to be big changes that are made. And I think that's what Fanatics is doing when, again, to bring this back to the Topps Big League, I think that's what Fanatics is doing with trying to put maybe more breakers into some of these, like, sets, I guess. I don't know. I'd love to be honest. So Fanatics or anybody at Topps or Fanatics listening to this and wants to put me on the card for next year's Topps Big League, I mean, I'm definitely down. I mean, like I said, that would be super cool. Because even getting into sport, and this is going on a little bit of a tangent today, but within cards, that's one of the things that I always kind of want to do, was like design a set of cards too. So like, that's, that would also be pretty cool. I don't know how to go about that realistically. Like, I know, when I was getting into cards, I was shifting over from sports design, and I saw people that were sport. That's why I like the Topps 2020 project so much, is because there were people that I knew from outside of sports cards, like, that were making stuff for sports cards. Like, Tyson Beck, I talk about him all the time. I would like to see him on a card. I mean, I don't know why they never, after the 2020 project and then Project 70 or whatever, they had different names for it. I don't know why they never did, like, an artist set of, like, artist cards. I think that would have been pretty cool, and I think that actually maybe was another missed opportunity. We talked about some missed opportunities on yesterday's podcast. But now that I'm thinking back to it, I would have loved to see something like that. Like, if we're talking about, like, influencers on cards, like, we saw probably, like, I don't know, it's probably like a couple months ago, in this year's hoops, apparently on the Joel Embiid card, Ken Golden is in the back. That's not really what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about, like, influencers on, well, I guess not influencers necessarily, but they're artists who make art on social media, so you could consider them influencers, I suppose. But I think that's one thing I still would like to see more of, and I guess maybe we should probably be, if they're going to do that Topps 2020 project again this year, and I know they called it something different for the past couple of years, but if they're going to do it again, I think the announcement should come out fairly soon. I mean, one of the other things was, like, the 2020 project was all, like, kind of during COVID, so, like, all of that news was, like, this was the news that I was reporting on, basically, and that's another reason why I probably liked it a lot. But I guess if that's going to be a product that is probably going to be announced soon, I would imagine. And I'm trying to think if they did it last year too. I don't remember off the top of my head. I know they've done it 2020 and then Project 70. So maybe 2022 was, I don't remember either way, but that was, like I said, those are some of my favorite sets, with, and it has the touch of influencers, artists, people who are in the industry, stuff along those lines. So, if they were to do something like that within Topps Big League, I would definitely be a fan, and that would, if I'm going to be honest, that would probably entice me to buy a product like that, where, I know the influencers, but I'm not super enticed on buying this product for them necessarily. I mean, even the tough fallback card is not even a realm of possibility that you pull something like that. But I'm maybe we'll see it over the next few years. I don't know if we will necessarily, now that I'm kind of thinking back to when the last time that those cards were made. But when it comes to, like, the influencers within sports cards, I think, people make a big deal out of it. I don't think it's that big of a deal. It's a cool set. If you like it, buy it. If you don't. I mean, that's kind of my advice for a lot of things within sports cards when I see people complaining online. But, I am a realist. I'm somebody who I think can realistically look at a lot of situations and realize that, like, no matter what happens within cards, this is probably what it's realistically going to be like, and seeing people how they talk about it. And it's more likely that people are not going to change their thoughts. If they don't like something, they're probably not going to like it. And if they don't, then that means they're probably going to talk about it, and other people are going to that don't like it are going to talk about it as well. And it just starts, the cycle of why I think a lot of angry stuff becomes more popular online than positive stuff most of the time. On yesterday's episode, we talked a little bit about opening day for baseball. But on today's episode, we're going to still talk about that. But it's a little bit of a different approach. And it's more of, I don't know, when these episodes kind of come around, they're kind of just like PSAs in general. When you have moments like opening day where baseball is coming back and, for Mike Trout hits a home run and Vladimir Guerrero hits a home run, there's going to be, obviously those players are at the top of their game, but there's going to be other players that there's going to be other players that do this exact same thing, and then other players who are as good as Trout and Vladimir Guerrero will do this thing, and they may fall off a little bit. Now, I suppose, I don't know, I think there should be I feel like there should be a term that's like coined for something, like the hype or something, but I don't think it's like that exactly. When players when they go out and they perform at the beginning of the season like this is where you see some pretty significant spikes in some players' cards. This is just maybe one of the examples. I think I don't know if it was this week or last week where I talked about when's the right time to sell players' cards. If a random player comes out of nowhere and has like we've seen it in the past where players will start out the season, they'll hit 3 or 4 home runs in the first few games, and everybody is like, oh my God, who are these players? And then learn about them. Those are moments where those types of players' cards probably will go up in value. And if you are somebody who buys into those types of players, like, I guess maybe that's a little bit of a shift in sports cards now, is like, that maybe there aren't as many people who want to buy everything, potentially. I don't know if that's correct or not, but that's sort of what it feels like, with a little bit of the market, I think, shifting in general, and just the volume, maybe. The volume of the cards feels like it's not as much, even though it definitely is. I mean, if you look at all the auction houses and all the cards selling on eBay, the volume of cards selling isn't down. But maybe it just feels that way because maybe there aren't as many newsworthy cards, potentially. That could be the case. And, with opening day, you're going to see some of the, and then you're going to see players that are as good as Mike Trout and Vladimir Guerrero. Their cards may go up as well. Probably not as much as as some of the players who are maybe a little bit cheaper. But that's sort of the point that I was trying to make, basically, was like, as the sports card market has evolved and changed, it makes me wonder the overall, the sizes of each kind of niche is very interesting to me. And it's like, I wonder if there's people within baseball who were buying some of those players who would have those crazy, crazy beginnings of the season. Or if it was just if that's just what that type of collector did in general, potentially. Like, maybe it's not just a baseball thing. Maybe it's like a football and a hockey and basketball type of thing as well. But so that's maybe my thought process is I'd be interested to know what the niches and how they shift. Because, we have the data, I think, within, PSA, for example. We have the data to say that 50% of the market likes PSA. And then the rest of the market, it's actually probably a little bit more, but the rest of the market kind of evens out. I don't know if there's a statistic really that could be pulled that would be something similar to that, where it's like baseball, and it probably depends on the time of the year as well. But I'm wondering if there's one sect of collectors that were buying those cards specifically. It must just be it'd be like a cursed, that'd be like a cursed collection, I think. That would be really funny. Would be like somebody who was just buying the hype on some of the players. Like, they bought the Mac Jones cards. They bought, like, you know, I can't think of any other players off the top of my head, but like players who had a lot of hype and they just are worth nothing now. That'd be kind of funny. That's like, you know, I feel like that's what happens when people buy jerseys and stuff. Like, I had a bunch of Bruin shirts back in the day, or just shirts in general, and it seemed like every time I got the shirt, the player was just gone. So I feel like that's got to happen within sports cards as well sometimes. Like, people who buy into a certain player and then they just get hurt or something. I wonder, the cursed collection. Yeah, that would be a kind of funny concept for a show, maybe, or like a fake show, like a clip show. I think that would be kind of funny. But again, the PSA basically about this episode is that with opening day, if you're somebody who gets really excited about buying cards and certain players, just know that the way that things are in sports cards, although I think the reaction has gone down significantly, I still think that there's going to be a significant increase in players' cards that, you know, if they, you know, like I said, they have to maybe start off the season with a bunch of home runs, or maybe a pitcher who starts off really hot, or a player who hits in a bunch of games in a row right at the beginning of the season. I don't know exactly what the scenario is, but there are scenarios, you know, when a baseball player kind of maybe is making his debut, or he's just having the good beginning of the season. We've seen that tons of times as well. So with the start of the baseball season, it's always so exciting. And I know that it can be exciting to buy cards as well, but this is your reminder that if you're listening to this podcast, which again, I know the audience that listens to this podcast, they probably are not falling into these traps, but if I can say this each time that there's an opportunity to, and save one podcast listener from going out and buying a card for way too much, that's one of our missions. That's one of my goals here with the podcast, is to do something like that, to help people learn about cards and buy cards for good prices and not have to worry about if they're spending too much on a card. And that, you know, if you're buying anything modern or anything new, you're probably spending a little bit too much, if I'm going to be honest. But that's basically the whole point of this show, is that be aware of what's going on in the sports landscape if you're buying and selling cards. Because, yeah, I don't know. It may just be, for some people, buying and selling cards is just, it's not necessarily that they like buying and selling hockey, or they like buying and selling football. It's just like whatever, you know, each sports card business is probably going to have a different way of buying cards, like a different either player that does well in their shop, or like a different, or a certain team that does well, like if they're selling on like Loop or whatnot or whatever. So, you know, there are different ways to buy and sell cards. And, you know, again, maybe buying and selling cards within hype is one way to do it. I don't know. It's something that I definitely have found myself doing, but it was something that I found myself doing years ago when the market was still pretty down. I think what ends up happening is these cards do explode, or they used to. Again, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to caveat, like, referring to what cards used to do and how the market used to be, I guess. But like I said, if anybody out there is going to buy one of these cards, just realize that you're going to probably pay too much. Like, if you buy a card of whoever this hot player is, you know, there's a chance that you could be paying too much and that you could lose all your money. I think that's the case when you're buying most cards. Nah, you know, and maybe it's like some people don't really care, because it's like, you know, they'll buy the card and then they'll remember like a couple years later, be like, oh, remember, you know, whoever the name is, remember at the beginning of that season he used to hit all those home runs. Maybe that's worth the money that they paid, and they're not really worried about the money that they're losing. That could also be the case. Like I said, there's tons of different ways to do sports cards, which I think is one of the best parts about the industry. And it doesn't, you know, you can follow the trends, or you can just do it your own way. But as long as you enjoy doing it, that's pretty much all that should matter if you're, you know, into cards and into the sports card industry.